Everyone, thank you for coming out tonight. I'm Kyle Cleveland with TUJ's Institute of Contemporary Asian Studies. We're happy to have Ron Zwigenberg here this evening. He's an assistant professor from the Pennsylvania State University. His research focuses on modern Japanese and European history with a specialization in memory and intellectual history. He's taught and lectured in the United States, Europe, Israel, and Japan, and published on issues of war memory, atomic energy, psychiatry, and survivor politics. His first book, Hiroshima, The Origins of Global Memory Culture, was the winner of a 2016 Asian Studies Book Award. It deals with the commemorization of and the reaction to the Holocaust and the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. This particular event and the topic that Ron is talking about this evening, I'm really interested in part because the topic I think is important with reference to politics, but we often don't have these kinds of lectures at TUJ, and I wish we had more of them. So I appreciate Ron bringing this to us. So let's welcome Ron.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. I want to thank Carl for inviting me and Temple University. It's really a pleasure to be here and have so many of you around. And in general, to speak English. I haven't spoken English in like a month, I feel. I don't know if I even remember the language. So this project, Citadels of Modernity, I'm going to talk about, is actually kind of in-between projects. Do between two atomic or nuclear projects I had. The first one was a book that Professor Cleveland mentioned, and the other one is the one, it's about psychiatry and the bomb. So this was a kind of like a fun interlude in between, which kind of grew and grew and grew and became this book, which I write with a colleague, with a friend, Oleg Benesh from York University in the UK. It's a co-authored book. He does the Meiji Restoration, 1868 up to 1945, and I do from 1955 onward. The project now is titled tentatively Citadels of Modernity, Japan, Castles in War and Peace. And it's the first, and I think I'm going to start maybe with an overview of the whole project, even though I'm going to talk about only a small part of it. So first of all, there are three primary aspects to this. The first one is the first dedicated research to examine the history of Japanese castles in modern period. Up until now, most research have been dealt with, if you talk about Japanese castles, people immediately think ninjas, samurais, warring state. But those are those castles, those buildings, structures, they have a modern history. So it's the first project that deals with a modern history. The second, which is one kind of like the big argument here, is this. So the second, this is the big argument that we make, when there's a whole bunch of arguments, but we argued that the castles played a vital role in both the militarization and the demilitarization of Japan. I'll explain what it means as we go along. And third, we examine the Japanese attitudes towards castles as a integral part of global currents and attitudes towards heritage and preservation worldwide. Now, given that we only have 40 minutes, I want to talk mostly about number 2 here, the role of castles in militarization and demilitarization of Japan. Now, although castles have been studied extensively, as I said before, most of it has got to do with samurai ninja part of history. Not to say it's not important, but castles as a modern phenomena is something that has been understudied. But castles, again, is something which is very modern as well. It has a role, aesthetic role, and as this Godzilla slide demonstrate, as a role as an aesthetic symbol and a cultural symbols in modern history. From the Edo period onward, castles no longer had any military use. So what they become were symbols of authority, signifiers of status and wealth. With the Meiji Restoration, this is what we argue, they still retain this status, right? Their role changed considerably, but now they were symbols of Japan's martial past. Now they're a symbol of something that was gone. Symbolism which again changed after World War II, when castles became symbols of a demilitarized culture and heritage. Today I'm going to talk about the demilitarization and militarization, but mostly about the post-war, because this is what I do. Mostly talk about the post-war. I'm going to start with kind of a about 10 minutes survey of castles history up to World War II, but the bulk of the talk will be about what happened after World War II. Now, let's start with what castles are and what are we talking about. Castles in Japan date to the Warring State era, which is 15th, 16th century. This is where the height of the building of castles in Japan, where you had castles all over Japan. But after 1603, the Battle of Sekigahara, the start of the Edo period, castles completely changed their function. It used to be military structures for military rule, but after 1603, there's no more war in Japan. For 250 years, Tokugawa era of peace, castles are still in every single domain, right? And you can see here all the domains. Every single domain have a castle town in it, okay? But they don't have any military structure, military function anymore. They evolved very little during this period of peace, and they were little more than symbols of powerful authorities. Their main role is to awe the local populace, and they have no practical purpose. That's why when a lot of them fell into disrepair, a lot of the daimyo didn't have money to fix them. A lot of them burned down. If you think about the biggest keep in Japan, the Edo Castle, not too far away from you, burned down in 1657, were never rebuilt. And as a result, when we come to the Meiji Restoration, 1868, when the Edo period ended and the Meiji period started, you only have 100 only. You have relatively what you had before. You had very little. You had 180 castles left in Japan. Now, at this point, what happened to those castles is that they used to belong to the daimyo, to those little mini countries. But when Japan is unified, the castles, together with the registries and the land, are quote-unquote returned to the emperor. Returned because he never actually, quote-unquote, because he never actually owned them. But now they own our state land. And this is where we start our modern history. Okay. Here, it is very important to note, and something that I want to emphasize, that castles often occupy the only very large open spaces in the middle of cities in Japan. And around them, most cities in Japan have evolved. So the biggest and modern castle, of course, is the Imperial Palace, Imperial Castle. We're going to talk about a little bit about how it changed from being a castle to the palace later on. You can also see here in Nagoya or Hiroshima how in all those places there are very important spaces in Japanese cities. Now, because of their strategic important location, most castles were giving over to the new imperial army as bases. But a lot other castles, which we're not going to talk about, okay, most of the time were disposed of as the local municipalities see fit. The country basically either gave it to be prefectural offices or schools or any other. This is from Fukui, this is from Matsumoto, any other. It's the only place where you can build those new government structures was in the castle, because the only place that the land was owned by the state. A lot of other places, because those places were seen as useless, there's nothing to do with them. A lot of those castles structures were sold to make money. This was even the case with Himeji Castle. It's a picture of the time. It was sold to a merchant from Kobe for 23 yen and 54 sen. They sold Himeji to him. The guy planned to burn it and to salvage the metal and the gold, but he couldn't do it for some reason, and the army took possession of it. Then Himeji also became an army base, and thanks to this, Japan have its own one of the only castle UNESCO sites now. Now, in this era, because castles were seen mostly as useless structures, the site was important, but the structure itself was not important for the new Meiji state. About 150 castles were turned down or otherwise destroyed until the 1890s. So you end up around the 1890s with about 30 castles, down from 180 in 1868. The army took over 43 of the largest castles. When I say castles, I mean mostly the keep, right? This is what is seen. The castle is actually, of course, a much bigger structure, But when we think about modern castles, specifically because they're symbols of authority, what's most visible, conspicuous, the symbol, the keep, Tenshukaku, this is what we think of. And only 20 of them were standing. The structure, the whole area of the castles, the army took over 43 of them for military use. This, again, unfortunately led to further destruction, and you can see about, for example, of Nagoya, where you can see, this is a picture from 1871, where the dolphins, they used to be like big shachihako, those golden dolphins on top, they already took them down. And they were preparing to destroy them, when the story is told that the German envoy, Max von Brandt, the German ambassador to Japan, passed through and said, guys, what are you doing? You can't destroy this beautiful, sure not. It doesn't really matter. What is important is after this, the army decided not to destroy the castle, and the Emperor Meiji gave money to donate money to preserve it. This is important because, and especially in the context of Nagoya, because this shachihako, those dolphins, right, were saved and chosen to send to Vienna in 1870 to be part of the first World Fair that Japan took part of. This, and also the showing of those shachihako in Japan. This is from Tokyo, from exposition in Tokyo. This is the moment you see a shift in Japanese views, not just of castles, of tradition as a whole. For the first kind of 10 years, 10, 15 years, there's a lot of destruction of traditional sites in Japan, temples in particular, Buddhist temples in particular, but that's for slightly different reasons. But from the late 1870s, 1880s onward, there is a shift in attitudes toward tradition, shift to the attitudes towards castles. And there is a gradual appreciation for Japanese culture and architecture that you start seeing then. Now, in the meantime, the people who control the castles are the army. Out of the first 12 regional army headquarters in Meiji period, 11 are located within castles, right? And the army starts to use this new appreciation for castles in order to promote its own heritage, its own status. The victory over China boosted nationalism and interest in Japan's martial heritage, and it raised the profile of castles through the massive expansion of the military that occupied them. The shift was accompanied by a move towards appreciation for castles in Japan, early histories, and cultural heritage. And you can see this connection here between the army having those massive parades on the castle. Again, this is the only open space where the army can do it within the city, right? So the army have those parades in front of castles, and also it connects its own martial values. This specifically in 1905. Started in 1895 with the Sino-Japanese War, but specifically come to its peak in 1905 with the Russo-Japanese War, reconnects its own heritage to samurai heritage. So here the connection is made quite clear when castles are seen both as a site of the army, where the army is, and also as a site of kind of a connection to the Bushi, the samurai tradition before. In the same time, you start seeing cities, specifically Nagoya. Nagoya is very important for this, to start using castles to promote their own image. So Aichi-ken, Aichi Prefecture, start to have his booths in exposition to promote his products in the shape of a castle. You see here 1, 2, you can see also a little fake Mount Fuji here for Kanagawa, right? So this Aichi here. Very important, there's another one here. Very important, notice the Tokyo one. Tokyo is modern, Nagoya is castle, right? So what you have here, you see a pattern, okay, that you see all over, where in here it's very specific with Tokyo and Nagoya, but also you have this, especially in exposition, this contrast called Wakon Yosai, Japanese spirit and Western technology. Castles are a site for display of this particular trope of Japanese tradition and modern technology. And usually it's got to do something that flies, right? So either with a hot air balloon here, or in Osaka with aeroplanes. Okay. Now, with the growing role of the military in society and a growing appreciation for castles, those are again becoming symbols of the military. Okay, and which we mentioned before. And this is something you see all over Japan. The military constantly use castles as a place to demonstrate authority, to demonstrate its military prowess, to educate the people about the role of the military. So they will have those expositions when they'll bring weapons, and they'll invite children to come and see those weapons and see parades. The Gokoku Jinja, it's a nation protecting shrine, like a little Yasukuni shrine that you have in every prefecture, is located in the castle, and you have those military festivals in the castles. And the connections between the army and the castles is growing and growing throughout the pre-war years. So you see here Nagoya, in Hiroshima, Osaka, and this Osaka again. And that's Osaka again. This is from 1903. It's very important here is the parades that happened after the big wars, that the Sino-Japanese and Russo-Japanese War. Parades that the Japanese army modeled on the Prussian army parades that came back from the Franco-Prussian War. They have those big 4, 5, 6 days, sometimes even like weeks of parades of the returning units coming back from Asia to the castles. They would have all those parades leading to the castles on the castle grounds. By the mid-1930s, as Japan is undergoing a process through national mobilization for war, military propaganda became increasingly ubiquitous. Castles played an important role in the process of the militarizing of society. This is specifically after the Manchujikan, after the Manchurian incident. You see castles as the site of those, I'm going to come back, as those national defense expos. Again, a lot of them are in castles. So you see here, Himeji becomes very important. Also, Sakura, which is very clear here as a symbol of Japanese martial sacrifice and everything. You see here the Navy pavilion shaped like a battleship here. Again, this Himeji, this is Osaka. Again, the Navy military is very prominent. This is Iga Ueno, I think. This is Iga Ueno. In Hiroshima, this is connection to Hiroshima. The connection to the emperor is also very important because the emperor had his headquarters during the Sino-Japanese War in the castle. So you see this headquarters building here, the castle, military planes, and then very interesting, this is the atomic bomb dome, which was a symbol of peace after the war, but at the time it's a symbol of, here too, of Japan's progress as a modern country. There's much more into this whole military and castles business, and I'm not getting into too much the details because I want to go into the post-war. But basically, as war started, the military presence in the war resulted in a lot of castles becoming a target for Allied bombing, and this had another round of horrible destruction on Japanese castles. This picture of Nagoya burning. US burning destroyed Nagoya, Okayama, Fukuyama, Wakayama, and a number of other big castles with less than, I think the number is 12 that survived the war. There's only 12 original castles left after the war. But post-war, and this is where we start the real lecture, so the biggest explosion in castle building in Japanese history is more Japanese castles are built in the 15 years after World War II than in all of Japanese history. Right now we have, the number is in the high, it's not very clear because a lot of them it's not very clear what is a castle, what is not a castle, but more than 250 for sure, which is as much as we had in the Tokugawa period. And as Kinoshita Noriaki from Todai said, this is a lot of this got to do with the war. I mean, he put it much nicer here. The war and the reaction to the war were led to the building of castles all over Japan. And there's a number of reasons for this. First, under the occupation, castles still remained military sites, right? But now they're occupied by US forces. Now, there's one thing for the castle to be occupied by your own armies, another thing for it to be occupied by a foreign country. Because now it means that the cherished symbols of your culture, cherished symbols of your tradition and history is occupied by foreign forces. US forces has used castles, first and foremost the Imperial Castle, okay, as a place of demonstration of their force. Same way that the Imperial Army did it, now the US Army did it. But when the US Army did it, it had a completely different meaning. In Imperial castles, for example, the plaza, which is now the Imperial Plaza, was taken over by by the U.S. military, and where the Imperial Army used to parade, while the emperor would stand on the walls on his horse, viewing them. Now there's American general standing on the other side, next to the Daiichi Seimei, the first Daiichi Seimei, life insurance building, right? How do you say it in English? I forgot. Right? You know, there's like a big building, it used to be the GHQ headquarters. So this is where now the plaza belongs to, right? This is where the American general stands. Well, the emperor is hidden. Actually, in one time there was a July 4th parade, and the emperor is hiding from the trees looking at this. It's kind of like it's of course a very, very symbolic moment. Now, for the Imperial Castle, I keep calling it Imperial Castle, but none of us will call it today this, right? For us, the Imperial Palace. When I ask people where is the biggest castle in Japan, most people say Osaka or Nagoya. It's not. It's right here. It's the Edo Castle. But it's not seen as a castle. This is because the Imperial Household Ministry, in a very conscious move, have changed the name of the Imperial Castle, Kyujo, into Imperial Palace, because the emperor could not live in a castle because of its military function. This transformation of the Imperial Castle in the center was kind of the sign for the beginning of a bigger transformation of castles in the Japanese imagination and Japanese culture as a whole. And again, a lot of it got to do with the fact that the Americans are here. First, because you have this whole change in Japanese ideology, of course, but also the fact of Japanese castles becoming sites of culture got a lot to do with the deterioration of Japanese cultural properties and cultural sites during the occupation. First, the Americans occupying castles resulted in a lot of random destruction, which also happened during the Japanese imperial time. Japanese imperial army was horrible to castles. It destroyed a lot of buildings. Used turrets, yagura, to keep horses in, as stables. You see, I don't remember English. Like the word, because I'm not a native speaker, so the first word comes to me in Japanese sometimes, and then in English. I'm not a Japanese speaker either, but sometimes it just doesn't come. Anyway, the Japanese army used to put horses in yagura. It used to store weapons and to make them into arsenals. Now, when American army do it, it's the Americans doing something to our heritage. So the US demolished, for example, a gate in Nagoya Castle. It filled part of the moat in Kokura Castle, making a parking lot. The Osaka Castle was defaced by graffiti. All of these things become a big deal while the Americans are doing it. Okay. So in place like Kokura, for example, there was a big movement as part of the anti-base movement to get the Americans out of the castle. Okay. Once the Americans go out, they rebuild a castle. Now this is a very what happened is that this rebuilding of castles, okay, and this consciousness of the place of castles in Japanese culture is done in the context of a much bigger change in Japanese history. So when they rebuild those castles, they rebuild them as something different. And I'm saying rebuilding, but it's not just rebuilding. A lot of those castles were rebuilt when they didn't have any castles for a very long time. For example, Osaka Castle was burned down in 1615. right? There was no castle there for a very long time. Kokura didn't have a castle from the 1880s. Kumamoto didn't have a castles from the Seinan War, the Satsuma Rebellion, right? But then decided to rebuild all those castles after the war. This is done in order to find a new, as part of this whole movement, to find a new identity for those cities and for Japan as a whole. In the beginning, this, and you can see it especially in Hiroshima, this was done in a conscious way in order to face the fact that those used to be military bases, military structures. So in Hiroshima, which happened in the most dramatic fashion, in the post-war, there's repeated calls to turn the castle into a symbol of peace. So, for example, in one of the most hilarious examples of this, as I see, in July 1947, the Chicago Shimbun reported on a plan by the Hiroshima chapter of Japan Peace Culture Society, Nihon Bunkai Heiwa Kyokai, to construct a replica of the Statue of Liberty here, using the Tenshudai, the ramparts, as a base. Now, we all know there are statues of liberties around Japan, right? There's one not far away from here. Forget where it is. There's one in Tokyo, right? Okay. You think it's crazy? We destroyed, you Americans, right? Well, not you, but we dropped tons of bombs on those people when they built our national symbol, right? But in a context of post-war, it made perfect sense for them because it was about, and I quote, it was about change and transformation. Like as this guy wrote the petition for this, the plans for the Peace Festival and a play commemorating the end of the war are but temporary means which can be easily discarded of. However, if we build a symbol of peace like the goddess of peace, Heiwa no Megami, which towers over Manhattan's shores, we will purify, and that's important here, we will purify the former Hiroshima Castle site and military clique that disturbed the peace with their crimes and was thus destroyed by the heavens. Heavens means the bomb. For their sins. We will then plant the seedlings of peace and nurture them, building a palace for culture, music, and sports. And that's what they want to do. They want to destroy the military city of Hiroshima. There's a reason why there's a castle here, right? This is the punishment, right? There used to be a splendid stuff, but the army with their sins destroyed all of it, right? Now we will build a palace of culture, music, and sport. And this is what castles are supposed to become in the post-war, a palace for peace. In Kanazawa, perhaps less dramatically, what the castle became was a university, right? In a number of places in Japan, Okinawa is one of them, Shuri Castle, which now became a castle again, but used to be the Yukaku Daigaku, the Ryugaku University. Sendai, which have the Tohoku University, and Kanazawa University, which is not there anymore, as you know, there's a castle now, but in the post-war, as part of an American project, actually. The Kanazawa University, which used to be the site of the 12th Regiment of the Imperial Army, now become Kanazawa University, which pride itself on being the university in a castle. You can see here in this picture. They really pride themselves on this one. Where are you? Okay, here. All right. On being a university inside a castle. In other places, castles become a site of popular entertainment. Anybody been to a Tewara Castle? Or Tewara-jo? Just an hour from here. It's just a crazy little piece of Showa. Showa era. It's like something from another world. So this picture here from Hiroshima, this is the first rebuilding of, a lot of the first rebuilding of the castle was done in this context. So the first rebuilding of the castle become as part of this, creating a little Luna Park on a site, which actually happened in Fushimi, you see here. And in Odawara, where before they rebuild the castle, they build a Ferris wheel on the Tenchukaku, right? And they brought an elephant. Why elephants? There's a lot of zoos. There was a zoo also in Himeji. Elephants and castles. If you're British, it's really bad. Are there any British people here? No, okay. So we're not going to talk about elephants and castles. Elephants and castles, why? It looks like a huge mismatch, right? But actually, elephants were a big symbol of peace. Anybody know about Hanako? Poor girl. Hanako was brought in 1949. Ian Miller wrote about it in his book about how she was brought from, Hanako's from Thailand, another one from India, Indira. And they were brought as a symbol of peace It was a big, big deal because, you know, the animals in Ueno Zoo were killed, massacred during the war. So bringing back those animals from, of course, US allies, right, Thailand, to Japan was big, big deal in the immediate post-war because the Americans had to arrange for this, and it was one of the first diplomatic diplomatic events in Japan after war to bring those elephants in. So in Odawara you have Umeko also, who just died a couple of years ago, and she was also brought as part of this event. She was brought to Ueno, and from Ueno she brought to Odawara. And again, there was a zoo in Himeji, and there's other places where you have those zoos and other popular entertainment. In Osaka, you had another exhibition called Fujin Tokodomo Hakurankai. This was actually already 1952. It was done to celebrate the Kowa Fujin Tokodomo Kinen Hakurankai. Sorry, it was to celebrate the Kowa Jokaku, the San Francisco Peace Treaty in 1952, and it's ordered in a very, very post-war Japanese in order to explain to women and children, because they need explaining, right, women, right, about peace and their role in a new Japan. It was done in order to so as women and children could hold their hands together and welcome in the spring of peace and reconciliation and ensure the new Japan will properly prosper in the democratic world. Now, what's got to do with castles? Women and children and robots and atomic bombs are the future. Castles are the size of tradition. Now, the Osaka Castle was built in 1930s. It's 20 years old. There was no castle there for 300 years, right? But now it's a site of tradition. Now, when it was built in 1930s, it was built as a site to honor Hideyoshi. It used to be Hideyoshi's castles, right? Toyama Hideyoshi, one of the biggest, most horrible warlords in Japan. And it was built at the time as a site to honor him as a son of Osaka. There's a whole history with Hideyoshi. You know, the Meiji emperor built, again, castles. He built his tomb in Hideyoshi's former castles because Hideyoshi was an enemy of Tokugawa. There's this big, so they kind of bring him back as a symbol of Japan's martial glory. And this is how the Osaka Castle was built. In the post-war, now it's not about Hideyoshi and warlords anymore, but about women in kimono doing hanabana, flower decoration, ikebana. Okay, you see, I even messed up in Japanese. And about tradition, celebrating a tradition, very, very generic tradition within this castle. The castle is becoming this side of tradition. Again, this Wakon Yosai. So you celebrate tradition, you celebrate progress. The same thing with the Hiroshima Expo here in in 1958, which celebrated the rebuilding of the castles, but also we celebrate the rebuilding of Hiroshima and the progress we're going to talk about a little bit later. What are you doing with this? Why do you celebrate both progress and tradition at the same time? It's very easy. By doing this, you're skipping the messy in between. If you celebrate the peace you have now and the peaceful nature of Edo period, because again, no war for 250 years, what's in between? The imperial period, and you don't want to talk about it. You're skipping the whole mess of the imperial period by making this symbolic connection. Okay. And you can see it all over Japan. When they rebuild castles, they have those expos, and there's expos, and all of them celebrate, on one hand, the only safe militarism around, which is samurai, which is so far removed from the real militarism of Japan. And on the other hand, the progress in industry and the beautiful new future of Japan. So you see here in Toyama, which is a very big hydroelectric region, and they celebrate this in those, and I don't have a clue what this is, right? But you can see here the castle and the dams. It's very socialist even, right? Also, very surprisingly for me, celebrating American military prowess. You can't really celebrate Japanese military prowess anymore, but you can bring American jets, like this F-86, I don't know, F something. That just came back from Korea. Again, it's the same time. And was a hit in in Toyama when they opened the castle. When they opened the castle, 12 of these flew over the castle. Again, remember, Toyama was, and most Japanese cities, were completely destroyed by American bombers. Not even 10 years afterwards, and they're displaying them here. But this is not really quite about this. It's about Wakonyosai, right? It's about celebrating tradition. On one hand, very generic tradition, peaceful tradition, culture, and connecting it to the future and the Pacific Japan of today. So and you see it again, it's all over. So for example, Aizu Wakamatsu, 1967 Expo. The slogan of the expo is from the white tigers to space travel. White tigers, the Byokotai, is a very famous squad of young samurais who committed suicide when they saw their castle supposedly burning. And now you have their era, which is our tradition, and then you have space travel, by this huge phallic missile in the middle of the castle. Now, Aizu, it's actually a really good example for another aspect of this, which is the castles becoming sites for resurrected regional identity. Because one of the things you have is all those places feeling they're becoming little Tokyos. Not just bombs destroyed Japanese regional cities, modernization or urbanization. If you go to a lot of cities in Japan, until now, what do you have? The same stuff everywhere, right? Like Mitsubishi department stores and not Starbucks then, but the equivalent thereof, right? People were feeling they're losing their tradition. Also, this is part of a reaction to the nationalism of the imperial era. So in a place like Aizu Wakamatsu or Shimabara, or other places, those places resurrect their regional identity from the Edo period and even beyond. So in Aizu Wakamatsu, for example, Aizu Wakamatsu was on the losing side of the Boshin War, of the civil war that started the Japanese modernization, right? I don't know how much Japanese history you know, so I'm going to be super detailed, even too much. They lost. Some of them were exiled. Actually, the first Japanese come to America come from there because they're exiled from their domain, and some of them end up in California. Well, actually not the first, but one of the most important first groups of immigrants. Now, in the post-war, this feeling of hurt, of being the victim of the center, victim of the empire, is resurrected. And they're saying, you guys, now that you lost the war, you know how we feel. That's how we felt all this time. We were Japan's first victim. What happened to us by Sacho, the Satsuma Choshu alliance, the one that fought them for the emperor, happened to the Asians afterwards. They actually demand an apology from Yamaguchi prefecture. And they're still demanding it today from Abe Shinzo, who's from Yamaguchi. And some of the same lines of the apology asked for the Asians. Michael Ward wrote about it. It's pretty fascinating. So in rebuilding the castle, they emphasized it as being the white tiger castle, the Byokotai. Now, the same Byokotai white tigers during the imperial past were celebrated, even though on the losing side. A lot of time in Japanese history, they celebrate the martyrdom of the losing side, right? So the Satsuma Rebellion, like Saigo Takamori, even though it was against the emperor, is still this big hero, which is kind of amazing, right? But so the Byokotai was celebrated as the real true heroes of the real true last samurais. And they were celebrated as military heroes, and they're actually even still to this time given by Mussolini. It still stands there today. There's one from Mussolini and one from the Nazis, from the Nazi party, was given to Aizu Wakamatsu to show the spirit. You can see it on YouTube. There's a visit by Hitler Jugend to the castle there where they exchange gifts, and the place and the things still stand there. So if, again, in the imperial palace it was celebrated as a place for martyrdom and fascism, now it's a place for peace. And the same thing in Shimabara, which resurrect the memory of Christian martyrdom. When they rebuild their castles, they rebuild as a place for, they have this whole exhibition about the martyrdom by the of the Christian. This is like 400 years old grudge, but again, they open it up in order to get away from the center. But I'm kind of diverging here. Going back to Walk on Your Side. not just inside Japan, outside Japan. In 1964, the World Fair in New York. The Japanese pavilion is shaped like a castle. You have on one hand, you have the Shinkansen and missiles. On the other hand, you have Japanese swords and everything, Japanese swordplay. And the slogan of it is from feudalism to the space age, right? So this all jump everywhere between, look at us, we came from feudalism to the space age. Now, again, going back to this Wakuni sighting, the very existence of the castle is an exercise in this. Because on one hand, you have the city, this is Osaka here, or Hiroshima, right? Modern city, which is put in contrast with a very peaceful nature of the park and tradition itself. So when they rebuilt Kumamoto, the mayor of Kumamoto say, the beauty of the castle is accented by the fresh sprouts, accented by the fresh sprouts of leaf on the camphor trees. One of our country's three famous castles, this Kumamoto, finally rose up from its disgrace. It's a strange and wonderful arrangement to see the castles contrasted with the modern skyscrapers around it. This is a rupture in image continuity, right? There's the city here, there's a castle there. There's a rupture in image continuity, rupture legibility, in which is effectively accessing the distinctiveness of the entire heritage production. While tradition in the West mostly is sheltered from modernity in the case of museums, and here it's placed in open visual opposition to it. Ironically, however, even though it's, again, all done in vis-a-vis the modernization led by Tokyo, when they rebuild the castles, they turn to Tokyo-educated agriculture and Tokyo-educated Tokyo construction company to build the castles. So even though they're pushing for regional distinctiveness and kind of this like anti-modern almost reaction, eventually they all turn to the same guys. Those two guys built most of the castles in Japan. They're both Todai graduates, of course, and what else, right? Kido Hisashi here and Fujioka Michio. Fujioka Michio built around about 20 castles. Kido built 6. It's distant second. And this led to a lot of castles kind of actually looking quite alike. There's a big paradox here, that on one hand, you want places to have uniqueness. On the other hand, eventually they all look like Himeji, more or less. Now, this is because this is all part of actually a very elite enterprise. The people who build it are not the local guy on the street, but people who are mostly educated in the center. People who are part of Castle Building Association, Castle Building and Castle and Architecture magazine, they all kind of lead to the same kind of design, the same kind of thinking about castles. So for example, the head of the Japanese Castle Association in 1953 said that castles were planned for fighting, but they're also an expression of the soul of the people of the time. Even if they have no practical use, castles overflow with their people's aesthetic emotions. This is a part of a trial of those people, the architects and other elite intellectuals, to rehabilitate elite culture and to turn it into something beautiful, tradition something beautiful, not associated, again, with war. Architects like Fujioka Michio and Kide Hisashi, they share those feelings into the aesthetic worth. So Fujioka, for example, writes, the Japanese have traditionally been thought to have little originality. But we're responsible for creating castle architecture, and this has become a valuable part of Japan's cultural heritage. Therefore, we have a duty to pass this cultural heritage that we have inherited from our ancestors to our descendants. So on one hand, you have people in the periphery trying to build their regional identity, but it was done by people who want to have the culture of their descendants, of their ancestors, which is mostly samurai culture. This is an even though, so this actually leads to a very uniform idea of what culture is and what a castle is. And again, everything eventually looks like Meiji, right? See Odawara here, and like Himeji. Now this also have very a political side to here, because the culture, oh, I don't know why it messed up, sorry. When those people are celebrating their culture, they're doing it in a context which the mid-50s and early 60s, which is very politically explosive. And you can see it in the Matsumoto Moonfielding affair, for example, in 1959, where in Matsumoto Castle, the local elite, the mayor and others, they have this big party. They dress up like daimyo and samurais, and they have the local city employees, women city employees, serve them tea and sake. And this become a scandal. And the city employees union was outraged by the treatment of the female employees and condemnation came from a lot of MPs. One particularly strong condemnation came from this woman, Yamamoto Matsuya, which is the head of the Agricultural Ministry Life Improvement Division, and a campaigner for rural poor, and she wrote a scathing critique of the castle boom. She criticizing the cost of castles, which are in excess of hundreds and millions of yen, mostly collected from poor Japanese. And she said, and in particular, criticized the reference to feudal lords and nostalgia for the era, which make them appear as repugnant feudal bastion. It makes one wonder what the point is of those reconstructions. It might lead people to mistakenly believe that Japan still longs for feudalism, and thus it is reconstructing symbols of authoritarianism. So people are seeing through those trials of rehabilitating elite culture, and they're fighting back. We have to remember again, this is a time of Anpo. This is the time of big popular struggle against conservatism in Japan. It's a time when the prime minister is called a fascist thug and a feudal clown. This is Kishi Nobusuke. You can see it, and castles are part of these struggles. You can see it, for example, in this picture by this Nakamura Hiroshi. It's from 1959. It's called a Hoki Seio Shoujo, Rise Up Young Men. And you see those protesters that are attacking feudalism, attacking this castle. And you have this young woman here, trapped within the citadel of oppression. Now, this gender critique of castle construction was actually rather apt, because gender is an important part of this struggle, and with good reasons. Going back to those women who were doing ikebana inside castles, women are always tradition in this construction. Women are always a part, always represent something very particular, the past, while men are the future. Also, when those architects talk about tradition, they really show their true colors when they do anything got to do with gender. So Kido Hisashi, for example, was critiquing all those Fujioka and mini Himejis all over the place, right? And he decried the emasculation that comes with such a historical creation of a pacified Japanese heritage. What he wants are those really good old Sengoku, like Warring State period structures that are symbols and sturdy building which reflected the character of the people of the time. Such building style efface and effeminate those castles. The white walls and a newer design can be said to be feminine, while the older one can be said to be masculine. Right. Going even further, one critique said that, ask the readers, it is for Nagoya, why the tenshu of the castle is so beautiful? It's because the tenshu is lonely and pure, which makes me feel the tenshu is much to common with the figure of a woman. Looking at the outlines of stone walls that draw inward arcs and towering white wall tenshu, I thought the desires for possession of the castles might not have been necessarily only for the Sengoku generals. I have a feeling that it's natural for Sengoku generals' aggressive spirits and lust to be aroused by the elegant but not unguarded, stark and sublime, overwhelming appearance of Yagura or walls. So what's going on here? The castles are being feminized. This, of course, is pretty extreme, right? But it's part of this whole process of trying to demilitarize and declaw castles from military spaces into civil cultural spaces. Through feminization of castles, linking those with technology, with elite Japanese culture and local identity, castles are successfully rehabilitated in the early post-war era, stripped of their association with the imperial state and made safe for peaceful Japan. Now, there's a lot of things changed from this period onward, and I'm happy to go to examples afterwards. We're kind of running out of time. But this transition to a new and ever-shifting requirements of the post-war order, as well as capacity to be adapted to other shifts over the past 70 years, are no small part because the very real gap that separates between the modern incarnation of castles from mid-Meiji Japan onward as signifiers, which are filled with meaning. Signifiers are filled with the culture of the time. And it's precisely this lack of continuity that has made it possible for those institutions to retain their high profile into the 21st century, and I suspect far beyond. Thank you.
I'll just ask a question to get started. Thereafter, everyone, you can come up to the mic and speak. Ron, if we were to project forward 100 years from now, and if you were to do this study then, what do you think the current moment's impact would have on the way we conceive of castles? A lot of this has been about the demilitarization of castles in the post-war era. Now you have Abe's government kind of ramping up and escalating their military policies. And by the same token, you have the Olympics coming in 2020. So do you think there'll be a new kind of national branding around castles?
Well, it very much will be. So I didn't really get to Heisei. Can you hear me? I don't know.
Yeah.
There's another round here that that I didn't get into because, again, there's so much to talk about and I talk too much, I know already. All those things are made of concrete, again, very modern structures. And now starting with Heisei, with 90s, they start rebuilding them with wood. Kanazawa is a couple of examples here. So Kanazawa is the biggest example here. It's because wood is authentic and there's a return to authenticity. It's kind of ecological or going back to pre-industrial. There's a lot of reasons for it. But also lately, what you can see is a celebration of the martial past in a very peculiar Japanese way. This is, for example, in Kumamoto, where the local daimyo, who was a pretty nasty guy, right? You know him, right? Is a pretty nasty guy, or in Matsuyama. Now they're like little Yurakara, and there's like this big ninja boom in those places. It's going to be a very weird nationalization if it will be, because it will be done through this. And you can also see it with a GA tie, with a SDF having characters. I don't really know what to think about it, because I don't see masculine Japanese nationalism coming back in the same way it did before. It will be very, very different. But whatever happened, it happens here, because this is the link to this martial past. This is the side of tradition. This is where you can make those shows, right? Where you can connect to some, because it's a concrete side of tradition. And what it means, of course, changes all the time. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's really hard to predict what's going to happen.
Well, just more on that question. Is Japan's Ministry of Tourism or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or is there any kind of conscious strategy of there's a lot of renovation happening, I know, in front of the Olympics. There's a group of students going to Kyoto this weekend, and Kiyomizu-dera's renovating. Yeah. And they're going to have that renovation done by March of 2020, so it'll be ready for the Olympics. Is there any thought of that in the restoration or renovation of these castles?
Nagoya just announced a month ago that they're going to tear down their concrete tension and build a wooden one, also for 2020. There's a whole bunch of new projects around Japan to do it. A lot to do also got to do with the Kumamoto earthquake. It destroyed the castles and kind of made people aware of the fragility of the concrete ones, but it also got to do with tourism and the Olympics and the government pouring. There's another round now. So the round of rebuilding castles in wood become because the government in 92-93 pours a ton of money to the countryside. Again, there's all those rounds of the government trying to make the countryside alive again. And there's recently been another round as part of Abe's economy to try to give even more money out of nowhere to Japanese region to resurrect them. So you see another round of people trying to build castles. You still don't see results with this, but it's something that's been talked about rebuilding those. Specifically, in Nagoya, you have this project for 2020, but it's something that's happening. Yes.
When these castles are renovated, who's responsible for this? Are these local prefectures or local?
Local.
Yeah.
Most of those sites are shiseki, historical ruins. So whatever happened, you have to. The cultural policies in Japan are very, very centralized. So you first have to go to the prefecture, and then you have to go to Tokyo, and it's all in a Monbushu in the culture ministry. And you have to get permission from all of this to do it. But usually, what happened, the permission and everything, and then you can get money from the tourist ministry and other places, bonds and other things. But the actual building and everything is done by construction companies run by the local government usually. I didn't speak about the construction companies. They're very, very important in this universalization because this construction companies kind of like divvy up the country and build stuff regionally. So you have the same construction company building all the castles in Kyushu and all the castles in like Yamaguchi and Shikoku. It's kind of like Yakuza gangs. And you can see it again now with the same kind of companies taking over certain areas in Japan. But the actual running is local.
Right. Everyone, don't be shy. Come up and as you have questions. You should note that we are recording this and we broadcast this on our YouTube channel.
So I shouldn't speak about Yakuza?
If you speak up here, you'll be on our YouTube recording. But please.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It's very, very interesting. Kumamoto Castle recently suffered severe damage, and looking at it, you could see a lot of concrete in it, which was falling down, but the moat and the other parts seem to remain in place, or apart from a lot of rocks that did fall down. Just interested in your comments about the difference between, say, the traditionally built castles and the ones that have been springing up since, say, the 30s or after the Second World War. You've already mentioned wooden castles first, and then concrete, and then going back to wood again. But are there any other construction techniques which are very much a hallmark of the older traditional castles compared with those that we're starting to see nowadays? And also, tied on to that, were the older castles more earthquake-proof than, say, the ones that were seen suffering damage, like the Kumamoto one, which was built in 1960?
Yeah, it's all got to do with earthquake and fire resistance, and there's a lot to do with the war also. After 1945, no building more than 3 stories can be built in wood anymore in Japan. It's a law that will change only in the 80s. There's a reason why they build in concrete, because they have to have certain standard of fireproof. They're completely obsessed about fires. They have to be fireproofed, and they have to be earthquake-proof, which of course they're not, but this is what we're finding out now. So it's got to do with 2 things. The war time, of course, when Japanese cities were burned down, and the occupation era, and specifically the destruction of Ginkakuji in Kyoto in 1949. A crazy monk burned down Ginkakuji, and there was a huge, huge panic all over Japan about fires. The castle in Matsumoto that got burned down, and there's this talk all over, and we can't let it happen anymore. We have to preserve our culture by building it in concrete. So all castles beside Matsuyama, I think, the ones that are not, there's a couple like Matsumoto and others that they just change the logs, they change all the wood, but it's the original structure, right? But all other castles, which are not original, are built in concrete. Up until the 80s when they changed this law and then started building in wood. But there's no really other, as far as I know, not really other structures in between because of this this law, this construction law that forbid to build structures in wood or other materials because of earthquake issues.
All right. Thanks for a really interesting talk. I love all of this stuff about sort of the politics of tradition and stuff. It's just really fascinating. I'm just curious who runs a lot of these castles and castle parks. Presumably the local government or the prefectural government would have to be involved to a large extent. But I just, I don't know, I wonder. Shuri Castle, and I hate I try my best to not be the guy who's always like, but also in Okinawa. But Shuri Castle is run by Chioda Foundation, and
Yeah.
I don't know who they are sort of politically or what, but they are a foundation and not simply the city government. And they oversee the reenactments of many royal rituals and so forth, and that has certain connections to, if you want to call it Okinawan nationalism or Okinawan anti-Japanese nationalism, or whatever you want to call it, but certain rhetorics and discourses and so forth. And so I'm just wondering who runs many of these castles.
Another thing I didn't mention, a lot of those are public-private initiatives. So it will be the city council, but not just the city, it will be the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce and other NGOs. Castles were starting to rebuild before the war. Osaka was built in 1930, right? Before the war, there's all those civil society groups that try to build castles, a lot of time, like in Kumamoto, in connection with the military, to show that our commitment to the ideals of the state, but also to show our public, our pride in the city. And they have those plans in place. They just don't have the money, and then war comes. But the plans are still there, and those people, a lot of time, are still there. The same people start to rebuild the castles. Later on, they team up with the city. A lot of time, what they do, they set up some kind of organization. It's a question of who gets the money, who does the maintenance, and so on and so on. A lot of time, there's some kind of a public-private corporation, actually in most places, that runs the place. So it's not quite government. It's very Japanese. It's not quite government. It's not quite not government. And usually, you have the same guy who will be the Chamber of Commerce one day, will be the mayor the other day. It's the same people, right? And they probably also went to Todai. So no offense, Todai people, but it's usually a mixture of public-private, mostly elite-connected, and had very particular idea of what Japanese culture is. Not everywhere. In some castles, you do have emphasis on, for example, Iki, the peasant rebellions. And and you have like folk craft and not just samurai swords. But because of the ninja and samurai boom, because of tourism, all of this thing is really getting thrown out, and you have more and more ninja castles and stuff like this, just because what people come to see. It's about money. A lot of those things are built purely for money. I didn't even mention, anyone been to Atami Castle? Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about this. Yeah. Yeah. I can give you more details afterwards also.
I wasn't sure if they wanted to like have this up here, so
sorry,
they
did
record it,
I?
but yeah. So Atami Castle was built mostly for tourist reasons.
Yeah.
Is there do you think there'd be like a trend or trend of castle building that is mostly regards Atami Castle and or not Atami Castle itself, but like just the more historical and just touristy related purposes rather than just what the castle itself symbolizes as.
Yeah, it's
like a
about
military.
money. Atami, if a bit of people don't know, Atami Castle is a totally fake castle. There's never a castle there. It was built 9 floors, never such a thing in Japanese construction, 9 floors castle. It has a pachinko place inside, right? A shunga museum, a sex museum. And even if you go up to the Tenshu, to the viewing place, there's little, those little pools where you have this little fish that eats the dry skin. Sorry, I gross you out. It's up there. It's totally for tourism. It's totally made up. Odawara-jo is also very touristy. This is Katsuyama. I mean, look at those. Look at this. Chinese dragons, right? Enough to do. It's all for tourism. There's a lot of them all over the place. But no one really called them real castles because everybody think about Himeji, Nagoya, Osaka. A lot of it is about making money. Either the construction companies that are involved, the architects make loads of money from this, and also for tourism, because a lot of those places, regional, they're really worried about income because especially places around Tokyo, everything going, that's Atami is not very far from here. All the industry, everything is going to Tokyo, and they're becoming kind of a toilet stop on the way. It's actually, Odawara calls this, they call it like the Hakone no toilet. And they're really pissed off about this. They're like, we want to build our castle to bring tourism here and to develop the place. But it ends up with stuff like this sometimes, right? Chinese, Japanese, whatever it is. Okay.
I'm Patrick Schwemmer of Musashi University. On that Chinese-Japanese note, as a pre-modernist, this is a fascinating sort of palimpsest that you've presented. But I might point out that it goes back even farther into the past because this is not my work. Mark Erdman, who was a grad student in art history at Harvard, and where is he now? And Anton Schweitzer of Tulane, I think, do Azuchi Castle and Osaka Castle, respectively.
Yeah.
And actually, they're pointing out that in their original context, there's kind of a mythology of them being extremely practical structures, but in fact, they're a display of kind of fantastical space, which is lifted primarily from Chinese monochrome ink painting.
Oh.
Actually, these big
Kumamoto, for example,
stacks.
Kumamoto and Osaka were built, a lot of them just to show off the locals, I mean, how strong and beautiful. And
Right. Do you know the current status of the movement to rebuild the Tenshukaku of Edo Castle?
yeah, there is a NGO.
That was happening.
It's happening right now. Again, Olympics, and they're really pushing hard. It's never going to happen, but they have a website you can choose. They're collecting money. Not going to happen. Mostly because it's imperial property.
Right.
But also
That would kind of undo the symbolic.
I don't know
development that you
about this.
described
It's just that
in a way.
it's very complex in terms of who owns the land. You know, there was in 1945, city of Tokyo is sure the emperor is going to decamp to Kyoto and going to take over the whole thing. There's like this really wonderful trove of documents in the Kokai in the Dark Library about all the plans they had for the space. They were really excited because for all this time, Tokyo was stuck with a huge chunk of the town, not just Tokyo, all Japanese cities, going back to these pictures I saw before. Because this is, let me go back to the picture I saw before of the cities, because it's not just what is now the castle is a really tiny part of what the castle, used to be. Sorry, so I'm going back all the way. So this is now just a palace here, right? All of this was giving back to Tokyo, right? But then actually all of this around here was a no-go zone. Same thing with Nagoya. All of this was military. Hiroshima, actually you can still, Hiroshima I know much better. All of this was military. So you couldn't get into those places. So after the war, cities are really, really excited about getting back those places, but it doesn't happen because the imperial household agency is really like digging in and say, we're not giving this back. And you don't mess with the emperor, basically.
I remember surrounding that there was a fascinating mythology of the actual practicality of traditional woodworking and joinery techniques and how they're actually way more earthquake-proof than any buildings on springs that you can build today.
Are they?
I don't. That was part of the discourse.
It's part of discourse now when they're rebuilding all those things from wood. They say this is,
Right.
and it's part of like we Japanese know better than you Westerners about how to build buildings, right? Is it?
It'd be part of that, wouldn't it?
Was it? Yeah, sorry, we're having a private
I
conversation.
don't know if
here.
there's been actual studies and
I don't
stress
know.
tests
I'm
done,
not an earthquake engineer. Does somebody know about? Is it really?
That was part of the movement to rebuild the Edo Castle.
But there is part of the movement to rebuild in wood is built around this whole idea that Japanese at the past were some kind of more ecological than post-modernization. So there is, for example, this whole discourse on how Japanese were more green and more ecological. Natural, right? Japanese is natural, West is industrialization, which of course is total. I'm going to say what I'm going to say. It's not true, let's say. But this is part of it. This is part of the movement to build wood, is that wood is natural while concrete is non-natural and foreign and Westerner, even though we all know living in Japan that concrete is the most Japanese of substances, right? It's everywhere. Yeah. Someone had a question before? Yeah.
Hello.
What?
Alright, so this is like more architecturally speaking.
Go ahead.
So did like the castles, traditional ancient castles, are they what influenced like the V-shaped architectural design of like most residential areas in Japan? And like there's just like a lot of consistency and similarities in like roof materials and the shape. Is that coming from castles?
Not necessarily. There's a whole Minkan kind of, I mean, there's people here who probably know much better on this about me, but there is a early 20th century, mid 20th century ideas of what a Japanese Minkan, a Japanese house is, which is based on whole part of things. There's a whole idea of reinventing Japanese countryside and Japanese houses as some kind of a symbol of Japan we lost, because all of this is going down the drain after Meiji. No one builds a traditional house after this, right? But so people from Tokyo come out and say, we found the traditional Japanese house. This is how you build them. But it's kind of a reinvented tradition, which become also very uniform. It's also got to do with the castle, the same thing. So traditional architecture, what it is, it's very varied. There's like all sorts of castles all over the place, right? There's not, but you start to have uniformity around the Edo period in castles because of unification of Japan. And some of it is copied to merchant houses because it's a symbol of authority and wealth. So some of it is copied. And even now, if you go to a lot of Japanese countryside houses, they have a little shachihoko. They have a little dolphin on top, right? Which you can buy for, I don't know, 5,000 yen or something. And put it on the roof. They have little roof tiles. Each is based on castle, but this is a modern phenomenon. I'm not sure if peasants in the Edo period had enough money to do it. Some of them did, probably.
Because it seems like for like a modern city, like
Yeah.
it's very still consistent, like
It's,
uniform.
if it's consistent and uniform, it's probably modern.
And like, and do you know? There's maybe more architecture. Do you know why it's a V? Like, what's the design inspiration? Like,
I don't know.
okay.
Sorry.
All right, I'll
It's
have
got
to
to do,
Google
it's
it.
probably got to do something with China, because it's always got to do something with China, but I don't really know. I'm sorry.
Okay, I can explain you a little bit. I'm an architect, so
Yeah, go ahead.
Since
As I said, there are people here much more qualified than me to talk about
so
these
anyway,
things.
most of the Japanese architecture comes from China,
Yeah,
and it's southern China,
Yeah.
with a current that was in the between 7th and 11th century.
Yeah.
So the traditional Japanese house is, as a matter of fact, a replica of
Yeah.
southern Chinese house. That's why they're not well insulated, because they didn't need to have
Yeah.
to adapt to that climate. So and they were of course wooden, and the Japanese ameliorated that technology, and the Japanese joinery you were talking
Yeah.
about is fantastic, because there is no nails in the real original one,
Yeah.
and that's very beautifully earthquake resistant.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of adaptation. But what I would like to talk about is really, I will ask you the question. I would like
Yeah.
to ask you the question is about the Japanese seem to be very unease with these castles,
yeah,
and they are not organized. Every city tried to do something with their history, or create a new castle or new history or something. But on the other side, the Shinto organization in the country is very strong and very well organized. Like when you take the Ise Shrine,
yeah,
they have I don't know how many tens of 100 years they renew.
Renovate,
They take
yeah.
the wood. It is distributed in different prefectures. There is a incredible organization within the archipelago
yeah.
around this. And I don't understand why they are so disoriented with the castles, and they are so well organized with this Ise and whatever, because Ise also is built before the Chinese influence. And I think maybe it has to do with their origin.
With the origin and the politics of Shinto, Shinto became a state religion and have very, very strong organizational structure. Unlike in the case of the castles, there is very little organizational structure to bring all those castles under one roof. Shinto, both in terms of how you build stuff and how it's much more centrally organized and much more ritualized, just because because it was a state religion, and because after the war, those structures remained. Americans let them stay, and they really control almost every aspect of Shinto. And I'm not an expert of Shinto, but I know that those structures exist, organizational structure exists. And this is why I suspect it will also come to architecture and how you build. There are rules, right? So for example, Meiji Jingu was supposed to be built in concrete. The emperor, not the emperor, Chichibu, she was is second, third, and one of the imperial family, don't remember exactly who, come down and say, you don't build temples in concrete, shrines in concrete. It can't be done. There's someone who come and say, you cannot do it. So they didn't do it. They built in wood. But there's no one person who can come and say, in the case of the castles, you can't do it. There are state regulations, but it's about building every structure everywhere. But there's no one there to say you can build it like this or like that. There's no organizational structures to control all this phenomenon. This is why it's kind of like all over the place, and especially in the post-war.
Thanks for the very interesting talk. You kind of hinted at this, and I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about it more. You mentioned that, like Okinawa and other places, the relationship maybe between U.S. bases and the reconstruction of castles. In Kanazawa, there's the Uchinada, the big Uchinada protests against the U.S. bases. And I'm wondering if there's something there related to protests against the continued U.S. presence in the post-war period in the reconstruction of castles.
Well, in Okinawa is the most. I don't really write about Okinawa because someone wrote about it already. There's a book about the Shuri Castle specifically and connects it to Okinawan, I wouldn't call it nationalism, but cultural nationalism for sure, and resentment towards Japan. And someone mentioned it before also about how the Shuri Castle is a site of performance of Okinawan culture and resistance. Castles are focal points of identity because they're symbols of tradition. So this is where this thing kind of come in. So, and in every region, they fill up whatever they want to fill it up. So in I kind of skipped the daimyo part, but sorry. So take for example Okinawa, Shuri Castle is a site of tradition, but in a place like Kumamoto or Matsuyama, right? So Kato Kiyomasa in Kumamoto, he's kind of celebrated as the father of the city. They have this huge statue of him in front of the castle. I also already showed his Yurakata before. He and Kumamon are the two biggest stars on the site. He is both in a post-war, both in a pre-war and a post-war, is the symbol of Japanese martial valor. Now this guy is one of the biggest butchers in Japanese history, right? Especially if you're Korean, you don't really like. Until today, you have Koreans who come to Kumamoto spit on the spit and do other worse things to the sculpture, right? But Kumamoto still maintain the castle as a symbol of their proud martial tradition. So in Kumamoto is martial tradition and even connection to the imperial house, because Kumamoto was a site of where they stopped the Satsuma rebellion and they fought for the emperor. Right? So they still maintain a post-war. Okinawa is about resistance to Japan. I mentioned Shimabara before, about Christianity and being victims of Tokyo and victims of the shogun. Aizu Wakamatsu. Every place fill this empty vessel with whatever symbolism it wants. So it really got to do with this. In terms of the bases, just very shortly, again, once the Americans are occupying those places, and it doesn't happen for very long, just for occupation a little bit afterwards, because the Americans disengage from Japanese cities. They don't want American soldiers in Japanese cities. They will all go either to Okinawa or to other bases because of the anti-base movement. You don't see it anymore, but for quite a period, you have Americans in the center of cities, in castles, and this had very big importance for the reconstruction of castles once the Americans leave, because you want to reconstruct symbols of pride. And this is specifically, you can specifically see it in Kitakyushu, in Kokura, where they have Jonai Kaiho Undo, like the castle liberation movement is called. It's Kaiho Undo, liberation movement, right? Which is kind of a right-wing movement to rebuild the castles and get the American out. So it's a direct connection there.
Oran, thank you very much.
Thank you.